The ping of my phone sliced through the Sunday morning quiet like a shard of glass, and I knew, even before I looked at the screen, that something had broken. I had just pulled a tray of oatmeal cookies from the oven, the ones with the extra cinnamon because my grandson Leo said they tasted like Christmas morning. My hands were still dusted with flour, my apron speckled with butter, and I was smiling at the thought of seeing his little face when he bit into one, the way his eyes would go wide and crinkly at the corners, just like his grandfather's used to. I wiped my palms on my hips and picked up the phone from the counter, expecting a photo of Leo building a Lego tower or my granddaughter, Lily, holding up a crayon drawing of a rainbow horse. That was what Sundays were for. Sunday mornings were for baking and texting and the slow, sweet warmth of belonging to people who belong to you. The preview on my lock screen showed only his name. No emoji. No photo. No heart. Just Derek, in that stark, generic font that my phone defaulted to when I hadn't assigned a custom image. I swiped up with my thumb, still tasting cinnamon on my tongue, and the world tilted sideways so fast I had to grab the edge of the counter to keep from falling down. Mom, do not visit our home this weekend. We have decided that we will not support any burdens. You need to figure out your own life. Please respect our decision. Derek. I read it once and the words didn't stick. They slid off my brain like water off wax paper. Too impossible to hold. I read it again, and this time they landed like stones in my stomach, heavy and cold. I read it a third time and I started counting the letters, as if arithmetic could somehow make the sentence mean something else. 14 words. He had used 14 words to erase 32 years of my life. 32 years of midnight feedings and school plays and broken bones and college applications. 32 years of second jobs and hand-me-down clothes and never, ever buying myself anything that cost more than $20 because every extra cent went to him. 32 years of being his mother. And he had distilled it all into one sentence that ended with a period, not an exclamation point, because he didn't even care enough to be emphatic about it. I scrolled up, desperate for context, for a previous message that would soften the blow, for some kind of explanation that made this make sense. The text before it was from last Tuesday. Mom, the kids loved the cookies you sent. Lily said they were better than store-bought. Leo ate 3 before I could stop him. I had baked those cookies with my arthritic hands. The ones that ached when the weather turned damp. The ones that had been gripping steering wheels and carrying groceries and holding his little fingers for so many years they had forgotten what it felt like to be still. I had wrapped each cookie in wax paper because Lily liked the crinkly sound it made when she opened the package. I had stood in line at the post office for 45 minutes, shifting my weight from one hip to the other, because it was 2 days before the holiday and everyone was shipping presents to their loved ones. They didn't send me a holiday present. They sent me a request to disappear. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Derek had learned to do his multiplication tables, his tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth in concentration. The same table where I had watched him eat his Cheerios one by one, making little battleship noises that he insisted were the sounds of a cereal fleet engaging in a naval war. The same table where I had shown him his father's military photo for the first time. The one of Robert in his dress uniform, looking so young and so serious and so full of a future he would never get to live. I had told him, "That's your dad. He was a hero, and he loved you very, very much." Derek had been 4 years old. He had traced the outline of his father's face with his tiny finger and asked, "Did he love me enough to come back?" I had held him so tightly that night that I thought I might break him, but I couldn't let go. I couldn't let go of the only piece of Robert the First had left that my husband died in Afghanistan when Derek was 4. I had been a widow at 33, a single mother at 34, and a grandmother at 58. Now I was 62 and my son had just told me I was a burden. I sat in the silence of my kitchen, staring at the screen of my phone, and I felt the weight of every single thing I had ever sacrificed for him pressed down on my shoulders like a physical force. The military life insurance that I had cashed in and put straight into a college fund, never spending a penny on myself. The 2 jobs I worked for 10 years, the diner at night and the cleaning service in the afternoons, so he could go to the best private school in the county. The 1995 Honda Civic with no air conditioning that I drove for 15 years, sweating through every summer, so he could have a reliable car when he turned 17. The clothes I mended with thread I bought on sale, The hair I cut with kitchen shears because the salon was an extra $40 a month, the meals I skipped so there would be enough for him to have seconds. I had never told him any of this. Not once. I had never held it over his head, never used it as leverage, never even hinted at the magnitude of what I had given up. Because that was what you did when you were a mother. You gave and you gave and you gave, and you were supposed to be grateful that you had someone to give to. You were supposed to find your joy in their joy, your purpose in their success, your meaning in their existence. You were supposed to be invisible, a scaffolding that held up their lives until they didn't need you anymore. And then you were supposed to step aside gracefully and let them build their own structures without you. But I hadn't stepped aside. I had lingered. I had called too often, visited too frequently, sent too many cookies. I had been a presence in their lives when they wanted me to be an absence. And now Derek had found the words to say what he had been thinking for a long time. I was not an asset. I was a liability. I was the thing that weighed him down, the obligation he had to manage, the aging parent who was going to need more and more as the years went on. And he had decided, coldly and rationally, that he was not going to carry that weight. I looked at my reflection in the microwave door. Gray hair pulled back in a clip. Reading glasses perched on my head like a forgotten tiara. The beginning of a mustache that I swore I would laser off when I had the money. Though I had been swearing that for 5 years and the money never came. The deep crease between my eyebrows from years of squinting at bills I couldn't pay. At menus in dimly lit diners. At the tiny print on prescription bottles that I had to read twice because my eyes were getting worse. I didn't look like a burden. I just looked like a woman who had spent her whole life carrying things. And now she had nowhere left to put them down. I did not text him back. I did not call. I was raised by a woman who told me that dignity was the only thing you own that no one can take unless you hand it to them. My mother had been dead for 12 years, but her voice was louder than my son's text, sharper than the pain that was starting to settle in my chest like a second heartbeat. She had said that to me on my wedding day, when I was 23 and glowing with the certainty that my life was going to be perfect. She had repeated it when Robert deployed, when I was pregnant and scared and trying to be brave. She had whispered it in my ear at Robert's funeral, when I was so hollowed out by grief that I didn't think I would ever stand up again. And she was saying it now, in the quiet of my empty kitchen, while the oatmeal cookies cooled on the counter and my phone glowed with the evidence that my son had chosen to discard me. I set the phone face down on the table. I made myself a cup of tea. Chamomile, the kind that was supposed to calm you down, though nothing had ever calmed me down except the belief that I was doing the right thing. I drank it in silence while the morning sun crept across the floor like a searchlight, illuminating every crack in the linoleum, every scuff from old shoes, every dry drop of something I had spilled and never fully cleaned up. The house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the faint rustle of the curtains in the breeze from the window I had cracked open. It was the kind of quiet that had once been a comfort, a refuge from the chaos of raising a child alone. Now it felt like a tomb. I thought about calling him. I thought about screaming at him, asking him how he could possibly say something so cruel, demanding to know what I had ever done to deserve this. I thought about showing up at his door, with the cookies still warm in my hands, and forcing him to look me in the eye and tell me to my face that he didn't want me anymore. I thought about every passive-aggressive text I could send, every guilt-laden voicemail I could leave, every weapon in the arsenal of a wounded mother who had been told she was no longer needed. But I didn't do any of those things. Because I knew, in the deep and unshakable part of me that had survived the death of my husband and the poverty of my early years, and the loneliness of raising a child with no one to help me, that none of it would work. He had already made up his mind. He had already chosen his wife over his mother, his comfort over my presence, his future over my past. He had already written me out of his life, and no amount of tears or arguments or dramatic gestures was going to change that. So I did something that surprised even me. I picked up my phone, and I typed a reply. One word. Okay. That was all he deserved. I pressed send before I could second-guess it, before I could add a question mark or an exclamation point, or any of the punctuation that would have betrayed my feelings. Then I turned off my phone and put it in the junk drawer. The one with the old batteries and the mismatched rubber bands and the takeout menus from restaurants I never ordered from because delivery cost extra. I didn't want to see his response. I didn't want to know if he was relieved or guilty or indifferent. I just wanted the silence back. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, behind the vacuum cleaner and a box of Christmas decorations, I found my husband's old footlocker. It was heavy olive green metal, dented in one corner, with his name stenciled on the side in faded white paint. SGT Robert Harrison. I hadn't opened this locker in 15 years. I had told myself it was too painful, that the memories were too raw, that I didn't need to revisit the past when the present was already so full of struggle. But now I needed something. I needed to remember who I had been before I became a burden. I needed to remember the woman Robert had married, the woman who had promised to be strong, the woman who had kept going even when everything fell apart. I lifted the lid, and the smell of old metal and mothballs and something faintly like Robert's cologne washed over me. Inside were his uniforms neatly folded, still holding the shape of the man who had worn them. His medals mounted on a small display board, the bronze and silver glinting in the dim light. A folded American flag, so crisp and precise that it looked like it had never been unfolded. And a letter worn and soft from being read too many times, that he had written me the night before he died. I sat on the edge of my bed and unfolded the letter. I knew it by heart, every word, every comma, every shaky line where his hand had trembled with exhaustion or fear or love. It was only 3 paragraphs. He said he loved me. He said to tell Derek he was proud. He said not to be sad, because he had lived more in 37 years than most people lived in 80. And then he wrote the line that had carried me through every dark moment since. Life is made of moments, Carol. Collect the good ones and don't let the bad ones scare you. I held the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. I could feel Robert's presence in the room, the steady, quiet strength that had always been his hallmark. He had never been a loud man, never been the kind of person who demanded attention or admiration. He had just been there, solid and dependable, a rock in a world that was always shifting. And then he was gone, and I had to be the rock for both of us. I had to be the mother and the father, the provider and the protector, the one who held everything together while the world fell apart around us. I had done it. I had done it for 32 years, and I had never asked for anything in return. Not a single thing, except the occasional visit, the occasional phone call, the occasional reminder that I was still part of his life. And now I had been told in the starkest possible terms that I was no longer welcome, that my presence was a burden, that my existence was an inconvenience to be managed and dismissed. That I folded the letter carefully, pressing out every crease with the flat of my hand. I placed it back in the footlocker on top of the flag and I closed the lid. Then I went back to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and typed one phrase into the search bar. Backyard chicken business startup cost. The cursor blinked at me waiting and I stared at it for a long time. I had no money. I had no experience. I had no one to help me. But I had a backyard, a sturdy fence, a shed that used to be Robert's woodworking shop, and 30 years of watching chickens in my neighbor's yard. I had watched them scratch and peck and lay their eggs, and I had envied their simple, uncomplicated lives. They didn't care about dignity or burdens or whether they were wanted. They just kept living, kept producing, kept moving forward. I was going to be like those chickens. I was going to scratch and peck and lay my eggs, and I was going to do it without my son's permission or approval. I was going to build something from nothing, because I had done it before. I had built a life from the ashes of Robert's death. I had built a childhood for Derek from the scraps of my own sacrifices. And now I was going to build something for myself. Something that no one could take away from me. I smiled. Not a happy smile. A quiet one. The same smile I wore when I told the funeral director we couldn't afford the mahogany casket, and he took $300 off the pine one. The same smile I wore when I told Derek we were moving to a smaller apartment, and he threw a fit, and I hugged him and said, "New adventures, buddy." The same smile my mother called her, "Just wait smile," because she never threatened anyone. She just smiled, like the quiet before a hurricane, like the stillness that comes before everything changes. I started making a list. Feed costs, coop materials, egg cartons, marketing. I didn't know how I was going to afford any of it. I didn't know if I could even get a business license. I didn't know if anyone would buy eggs from a 62-year-old widow with arthritic hands and a rusty Honda Civic. But I knew I had to try. I knew that if I didn't try, I would spend the rest of my life sitting in this quiet kitchen, waiting for a phone call that was never going to come, fading into the background of a world that had decided I no longer mattered. I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to be a burden. I was going to be a force. I was going to be the thing that people couldn't ignore. The woman who rose from the ashes of her son's rejection and built something so extraordinary that even he would have to admit he was wrong. That I reached for my address book. It was old, worn, filled with the names of people I hadn't spoken to in years. But they were still there. The military wives. The friends from the diner. The neighbors who had once borrowed sugar and never returned it. They were my network. My community. My potential investors. I didn't know if they would help me. I didn't know if they would even remember me. But I was going to ask. I was going to reach out and see who was still there, who still believed in the woman I used to be. And if no one came through, I would do it alone. I had done it alone before. I could do it again. I picked up my phone from the junk drawer and turned it back on. There were no new messages. Derek hadn't responded. He hadn't called. He had accepted my one-word reply and moved on with his life, as if I had never existed. I stared at the screen, at the blank space where his apology should have been, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, harder, more determined. It was the realization that I had been waiting for validation from someone who was never going to give it to me, and I was done waiting. I set the phone down and picked up the address book. I opened it to the first page, found Linda's name, and I started to dial. My finger hovered over the keypad, and I took a deep breath. The cookies were still on the counter, cooling and forgotten. The tea was cold in my cup. The morning sun was climbing higher, brighter, filling my kitchen with a light that felt almost accusatory. But I didn't look away. I didn't hide. I met the light head on, and I made the call. Linda, it's Carol Harrison. Yes, I know it's been a while. I have a business proposition for you, and I need you to listen before you say no. I didn't know if she would help me. I didn't know if any of them would. But I was going to ask. Because I had nothing left to lose, and everything to gain. Because my son had told me I was a burden, and I was going to prove him wrong. But as I spoke to Linda, as the words spilled out of me in a rush of hope and desperation, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That the hardest part wasn't the rejection. It was what came after. The rebuilding. The proving. The rising. And I had no idea if I was strong enough to do it alone. I hung up the phone, and I looked out the window at my backyard. The shed. The fence. The empty space where the chickens would go. It looked so small, so ordinary, so impossibly far from the dream I was trying to build. But I had made a start. I had made a call. I had taken the first step. And as I stood there, staring at the patch of dirt that was going to become my future, I realized that I had no idea what was coming next. I had no plan, no money, no support, just a stubborn refusal to give up. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was the most alive I had felt in years. I didn't know if I would succeed. I didn't know if I would fail. But I knew one thing for sure. I was never going to be a burden again. Not to my son. Not to anyone. I was going to be something else entirely. Something that no one could ignore. Something that would make the world sit up and take notice. And when I was done, when I had built my empire from the ashes of his rejection, I would look back at this moment and thank him. Because he had given me the greatest gift he could ever give. He had set me free. The phone rang, startling me out of my reverie. I looked at the screen, and my heart stopped. It was Derek. He was calling me. After everything. After the text and the silence and the one-word reply. He was calling me. I didn't answer. I let it ring. I watched his name flash on the screen, and I felt nothing. No hope. No anger. No longing. Just a quiet, steady certainty that I was done waiting for him to see me. The call went to voicemail. I didn't listen to the message. I didn't need to. I already knew what he would say. He would apologize. He would make excuses. He would try to pull me back into his orbit, to make me small and manageable and convenient again. But I wasn't going to let him. I wasn't going to be his burden, and I wasn't going to be his comfort. I was going to be my own. I turned off my phone and put it back in the junk drawer. Then I walked out to the backyard, stood in the middle of the empty space, and I made a promise to myself. A promise that I was going to build something so beautiful, so strong, so undeniable that no one would ever be able to call me a burden again, that I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew it was going to happen, because I had nothing left to lose, and everything to prove. That the phone stayed in the junk drawer for 7 days. I didn't check it. I didn't listen to the voicemail Derek had left. I didn't even look at the screen when it lit up with notifications, because I knew exactly what I would find. More texts. More calls. More explanations that would sound like apologies but feel like accusations. He would tell me I was overreacting, that I had misunderstood, that he was stressed and tired and didn't mean it the way it sounded. He would try to make me feel crazy for being hurt, because that was what people did when they didn't want to take responsibility for their cruelty. They gaslit you into believing that your pain was your fault. I wasn't going to fall for it. I had fallen for it too many times before. Every time he canceled a visit at the last minute, every time he forgot my birthday, every time he made me feel like I was an inconvenience rather than a mother. I had made excuses for him. I had told myself he was busy, that he was overwhelmed, that he had his own family to worry about. But now I saw it clearly. He hadn't been busy. He had been choosing Alicia, choosing his comfort, choosing to push me further and further away until I was nothing more than a name on a Christmas card, a check in a birthday envelope, a voice on the phone that he could hang up on whenever he wanted. I wasn't going to let him do that to me anymore. So I left the phone in the drawer, and I focused on the only thing that mattered. My chickens. The first hen came on a Tuesday. I had found her on Craigslist, a Rhode Island red that a farmer 40 miles away was selling, because she was too old to produce eggs reliably. He was practically giving her away. $15, he said, and she came with a cardboard box and a bag of feed. I drove my rattling Honda Civic out to his farm, which was really just a patch of land with a mobile home and a lot of mud. The farmer was a wiry man with missing teeth and kind eyes who looked at me like he was trying to figure out if I was crazy or just desperate. "Lady, you know this hen is past her prime, right?" he said, scratching his chin. "She might give you an egg every other day if you're lucky. She's not gonna make you rich." "I don't need to get rich," I told him. "I just need to start somewhere." He shrugged and handed me the box. I peeked inside and there she was. A scruffy-looking bird with rust-colored feathers and a comb that flopped to one side like a beret. She was beautiful. She was mine. I named her Beatrice because she looked like a Beatrice, regal and tired and full of quiet dignity, like an old queen who had seen too much and was too stubborn to give up. I carried her to the car and drove home with the box on the passenger seat, talking to her the whole way. "You're going to like it at my house," I said. "I have a backyard with a fence and a shed that used to be my husband's workshop. There are dandelions and beetles and all kinds of things you can scratch at. I'll take care of you. I promise." She clucked softly in response, and I took that as agreement. That when I got home, I set up her coop in the shed. It wasn't much. Just some scrap wood I had found on Craigslist, and a little nesting box I had built with my own hands. The work had been hard on my arthritis. The hammer felt heavier than it used to, and my fingers stiffened up after an hour of pounding nails. But I had done it. I had built something. I had made a home for Beatrice, and that felt like a victory. I bought 9 more hens over the next few weeks. Each one came with a story. There was a barred rock named Martha who had been rescued from a cockfighting ring. A leghorn named Daisy who had been abandoned by a family that moved away. A couple of Buff Orpington's sisters, who I named Thelma and Louise because they were always causing trouble, pecking at the fence and trying to escape into the neighbor's yard. Every hen was imperfect. Every hen had been discarded. Every hen was exactly like me. I spent my days cleaning coops and changing water and collecting eggs. The eggs came slowly at first, 1 or 2 a day, but they were real. They were mine. I held them in my palm, still warm from the hens, and I felt a strange sense of hope. It was small, like the eggs themselves, but it was something. It was proof that I could make things grow, even in the hard, dry soil of my life. I started selling eggs at the local farmer's market. My table was small, my signs were handwritten. My eggs were packed in recycled cartons that I had washed and dried by hand. I charged $6 a dozen, cheap for organic, free-range eggs. The first 2 hours, nobody came near me. People walked past with their artisanal cheese and their gluten-free bread and their expensive coffee. And they looked right through me like I was invisible. An old lady with gray hair and a card table. Who would buy eggs from her? But I didn't give up. I smiled at everyone who passed. I said good morning. I asked about their children, their dogs, their weekend plans. I learned names. I remembered faces. And slowly, one by one, they started to stop. You're the egg lady, a woman said to me, her toddler on her hip. My neighbor told me about you. She said your eggs are the best she's ever had. I didn't know who her neighbor was, but I didn't ask. I just smiled and handed her a carton. These are from my own hens, I said. They're fed organic grain and they roam free all day. You can taste the difference. She bought 3 dozen. She gave me $20 and a smile that made my heart swell. I had sold my first eggs. I had made my first customer. I had taken the first real step toward proving Derek wrong. The weeks passed. I built more coops. I bought more hens. I expanded my operation until I had 50 chickens in my backyard, scratching and clucking and laying eggs that I sold to a growing list of customers. The money was small, barely enough to cover my feed costs, but it was something. It was a start. It was the first time I had felt like I had a purpose since Robert died. Derek kept calling. His messages piled up in my voicemail, each one more desperate than the last. Mom, please call me. Mom, I'm worried about you. Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I listened to them all, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because every time I heard his voice, I felt that same sting of betrayal, that same cold shock that I had felt when I first read his text. He had hurt me so deeply that I didn't know if I could ever trust him again. One afternoon, he showed up at my door. I was in the backyard cleaning the coops, and I heard his car pull into the driveway. I knew the sound of his engine, the same way I had known the sound of his footsteps when he was a teenager sneaking in past curfew. I straightened up and wiped my hands on my apron, and I watched him walk around the side of the house. He looked terrible. His face was pale, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he was wearing the same shirt he had worn to work 3 days in a row. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He looked like he was falling apart. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. Please. I need to talk to you. I didn't move. I didn't open the gate. I just stood there holding the rake and I looked at him through the wire fence. You should have called first. I did. You didn't answer. I was busy. With what, the chickens? He gestured at the coops, at the hens pecking around his feet. Mom, look at this. Look at what you're doing to yourself. You're 62 years old. And you're hauling bags of feed and shoveling chicken shit. This isn't you. You don't know who I am, Derek. You haven't known for a long time. He flinched. That's not fair. Fair? I let out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. You told me I was a burden. You told me to stay away from your home. You told me to figure out my own life. And now you show up here, looking like a mess, and you want to talk about what's fair. I was wrong, okay, I was wrong. Alicia and I were fighting and she told me to send that text. She said you were too involved in our lives, that you were making her uncomfortable. I was weak. I was stupid. I listened to her because I didn't want to lose her. But I didn't mean it. I felt the rage building in my chest, hot and sharp. You didn't mean it, I repeated. You didn't mean to tell me I wasn't welcome in your home. You didn't mean to say I was a burden. Those were your words, Derek. They came out of your mouth. You wrote them down and you pressed send. So don't stand there and tell me you didn't mean it. You meant every word. He started crying. Big ugly sobs that shook his whole body. He sank to his knees in the grass, right there by the gate, and he covered his face with his hands. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. I've been so scared, Mom. I've been so scared of everything. My marriage is falling apart. My kids don't respect me. I can't pay the bills. And I thought if I could just control something, just push something away, it would make me feel better. But it didn't. It made me feel worse. I've been miserable without you. I watched him cry, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to recognition. I remembered that feeling. The feeling of being so overwhelmed that you pushed away the people who loved you because you didn't want them to see you fall apart. I had done it to Robert before he died. I had done it to my own mother. I knew that kind of fear, that kind of desperation. It didn't excuse what he had done, but it explained it. I opened the gate. "Get up," I said. "You're going to make the hens nervous." He scrambled to his feet and followed me into the house. I sat him down at the kitchen table and made him a cup of coffee. I didn't apologize. I didn't comfort him. I just let him sit there and cry until he had no tears left. When he was calm, I sat across from him and folded my hands on the table. "You need to tell me everything," I said. "No more secrets. No more excuses. I want to know what's really going on." He talked for an hour. He told me about the fights with Alicia, the ones that started small and escalated into screaming matches. He told me about the money problems, the mortgage they could barely afford, the credit card debt that was spiraling out of control. He told me about the kids, how Lily had started wetting the bed and Leo had stopped eating, how they were falling apart and he didn't know how to hold them together. He told me that he had been drinking too much, that he had started lying to his boss, that he had almost lost his job twice in the past year. And then he told me something that made my blood run cold. He told me that Alicia had been cheating on him, that she had been seeing someone else for months, maybe longer, that the person she was seeing was a man she had met at a gym, a personal trainer with a tan and a smile and no children. She was the one who wanted me to send the text, he said, his voice hollow. She told me that if I couldn't set boundaries with you, she would leave me. So I did it. I thought if I gave her what she wanted, she would stay. But she was already gone. She had already made up her mind. She just didn't want to be the bad guy. I stared at him, and I felt a surge of anger so intense that it made my hands shake. Not at him. At her. At the woman who had manipulated my son, who had turned him against me, who had used me as a bargaining chip in a game I didn't even know I was playing. She had seen me as an obstacle to her freedom, and she had removed me without a second thought. "You're going to leave her," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded slowly. "I have to. For the kids. For myself. I can't keep living like this." "Good," I said. "And when you do, you're going to get your life together. You're going to be a better father. A better man. And you're going to let me help you. Not because I need you to need me, but because that's what family does." He looked at me with watery eyes. "You still want to help me after everything I did?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm your mother, Derek. I'm never going to stop being your mother. But you need to understand something. I am not a burden. I never was. And I'm never going to let anyone treat me like one again. That includes you." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." "I know you are. But sorry isn't enough. You have to show me. You have to prove that you see me. That you value me. That I'm not just a problem to be solved or a debt to be paid." "I'll prove it," he said. "I'll do whatever it takes." I nodded. I didn't know if I could trust him yet. But I was willing to try. Because he was my son, and I had spent my whole life hoping he would be better than this. And maybe, just maybe, he could be. After he left, I sat at the table and stared out the window at the chickens. They were scratching in the dirt, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded in my kitchen. They didn't care about betrayal or forgiveness or second chances. They just kept living, kept pecking, kept laying their eggs. I envied them. But I also admired them. Because they were survivors. And so was I. I had survived the loss of my husband. I had survived the rejection of my son. And now I was going to survive this too. I was going to build my business. I was going to make something of myself. And I was going to do it on my own terms. But I needed help. I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies. I needed advocates. I needed people who would believe in me even when I didn't believe in myself. I picked up the phone and dialed Linda's number. She had already given me $500. I knew she would give me more if I asked. But I didn't want her money. I wanted her advice. I wanted her to tell me if I was crazy, if I was wasting my time, if this whole chicken thing was a pipe dream that was going to leave me bankrupt and broken. She answered on the second ring. "Carol, how are you?" "I'm hanging in there," I said. "But I need your help. I need to know if this business is really possible. I need someone to tell me the truth, even if it's hard to hear." "Girl," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. If I didn't think you could do this, I wouldn't have given you that money. You're one of the strongest women I know. And if anyone can turn a flock of chickens into a successful business, it's you. Her words washed over me like warm water. I felt the tension in my shoulders start to ease. I felt the fear in my chest start to fade. I felt something else too. Something that felt a lot like hope. I'm going to make this work, I said. I'm going to build something that no one can take away from me. And when I do, I'm going to prove to everyone that I was never a burden. I was just getting started. Linda laughed. That's the Carol I remember. Now tell me what you need. I told her everything. The property I had found. The contract I was trying to secure. The money I still needed to raise. She listened without interrupting. And when I finished, she said, I know someone who can help. A former business partner of my husband's. He invests in small farms. I'll give him a call. Thank you, I said. I don't know how to repay you. You don't have to repay me, she said. Just do what you do best. Make something beautiful out of the scraps. I hung up the phone and looked out the window at my backyard. The chickens were still scratching. Beatrice was perched on the edge of the coop, her comb flopped to one side, her eyes half closed in contentment. She looked like an old queen surveying her kingdom. I smiled. I'm going to make you proud, Beatrice, I said. Just wait. But as I stood there, the weight of everything that had happened settled on my shoulders again. Derek's confession. Alicia's betrayal. The mountain of obstacles that still lay ahead. I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if I had the strength. And then I thought about Robert's letter. About the last line he had written to me. Life is made of moments, Carol. Collect the good ones and don't let the bad ones scare you. I had been letting the bad ones scare me for too long. I had been letting them define me, control me, keep me small. But I was done with that. I was done being afraid. I was done being invisible. I was going to collect the good moments. And I was going to build a life that was worth living. The phone rang again. It was Derek. I answered it. Mom, he said, his voice shaky. I did it. I told her I was leaving. She was furious. She said she was going to take the kids and move back to her parents. I don't know what to do. You're going to fight for your kids, I said. You're going to be the father they deserve. And you're going to let me be there for you. Not because you're weak. Because you're strong enough to ask for help. Thank you, he said. Thank you for not giving up on me. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I said, I'll never give up on you, Derek. But you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that you'll never treat me like a burden again. Promise me that you'll see me for who I really am. Not your mother. Not a problem to be solved. A woman who has survived everything life has thrown at her. A woman who is going to keep surviving. With or without you. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, I promise. I didn't know if I believed him. But I wanted to. Because he was my son. Because I had spent my whole life hoping he would be better than this. And because deep down I still loved him. Even when he didn't deserve it. I hung up the phone and walked back to the backyard. Beatrice clucked at me. And I knelt down and scooped her up. She was warm in my hands, her heart beating against my palm. She was small and fragile and full of life. You and me, Beatrice, I said. We're going to show them. Every single one of them. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of what was coming. The legal battles. The financial struggles. The long, lonely nights of trying to build something from nothing. I had no idea if I would succeed. I had no idea if I would fail. All I knew was that I was done running. I was done hiding. I was done letting other people decide my worth. I put Beatrice back in the coop and went inside. The phone was still ringing. More calls. More messages. More demands on my time and energy. But I didn't answer any of them. I just sat down at the kitchen table and started making a list of everything I needed to do. It was a long list. Impossibly long. It might have been the longest list I had ever written. But I wrote every item down one by one. Feed costs. Coop materials. Business licenses. Insurance. Marketing. 1,000 small tasks that added up to one big dream. And when I finished the list, I looked at it and felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. The kind of determination that had carried me through my husband's death, and my son's childhood, and every other trial I had ever faced. The kind of determination that didn't know how to give up, that I was going to make this work. I was going to build something that no one could take away from me. I was going to prove to everyone that I was not a burden, but a force to be reckoned with, that I didn't know what was coming next. I didn't know how I would overcome the obstacles that lay ahead. But I knew one thing for sure. I was never going to give up, because giving up meant accepting the role Derek had assigned me. And that was something I would never do. I was going to rise. I was going to soar. And I was going to make the world see me for who I really was. A survivor. A fighter. A woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The first month of the expansion was a war fought in mud and exhaustion, and the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and refused to leave. I woke at 4 every morning, before the sun even thought about rising, and I drove the 40 miles to the new property in my rattling Civic with the windows cracked because the heater had died sometime in November. The land was 2 acres of frozen nothing, an old dairy farm that had been abandoned for a decade. The barn leaned to the left like a tired old man. The fences were broken in a dozen places. The farmhouse had no electricity and no running water, and a smell that reminded me of the time Derek's pet hamster died behind the refrigerator, and we didn't find it for 3 weeks. But I saw potential. I saw what it could be. I saw the rows of coops I could build, the acres of pasture where the hens could roam, the bright red barn that would become the heart of my operation. I saw all of it so clearly that I could almost touch it. And that vision was the only thing that kept me going when my body screamed at me to stop. I spent the first week just cleaning. I hauled out piles of rotting hay and rusted machinery and bird nests that had been abandoned for so long they had turned to dust. I scrubbed the floors of the barn with a stiff brush and a bucket of water I had to carry from the nearest gas station. I patched the holes in the roof with tarps I bought on clearance at a hardware store. I fixed the fences with wire and prayer, and the kind of stubbornness that had kept me alive for 62 years. The work was brutal. My arthritis flared up so badly that I could barely grip a hammer. My back screamed every time I bent over. My hands cracked and bled from the cold and the constant contact with rough wood and rusty metal. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror of the farmhouse bathroom, and I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She was gaunt and tired and covered in dirt. She had a streak of chicken feed in her hair and a bruise on her cheek from where a board had slipped and smacked her in the face. She looked like a ghost. But she was still standing. She was still fighting. Linda came to visit on the 3rd week. She drove up from the city in her shiny SUV, wearing designer jeans and a puffy vest that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She stepped out of the car and looked at the property with an expression that I couldn't quite read. It might have been pity. It might have been horror. It might have been admiration. I couldn't tell. Carol, she said, shaking her head. You've been busy. I told you I was going to do this, I said, wiping my hands on my apron. I don't do things halfway. She walked around the property with me, inspecting my work. She asked questions about the feed, the water system, the heating lamps. She nodded at my answers and made notes on her phone. When we got to the barn, she stopped and stared at the tarps on the roof. You need a real roof, she said. Those tarps aren't going to hold up in a storm. I know, I said. But I can't afford a real roof yet. I have to prioritize. Prioritize what your chickens are going to freeze to death when the next snow hits. You can't build a business on chickens that are dead. I felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp. I know what I'm doing, Linda. I've been doing this for months. I've raised 50 hens from chicks. I've built coops from scratch. I've sold eggs to a wholesale distributor. I'm not some amateur playing pretend in the backyard. She held up her hands. I'm not saying you're an amateur. I'm saying you're working yourself to the bone on a property that needs more work than you can give it. You need help. Real help. Not just my money. People. Hands. Bodies. I opened my mouth to argue. But she cut me off. Listen to me, she said. I know someone who can help. A former business partner of my husband's. His name is Marcus. He owns a construction company. He's retired now, but he still does small projects for friends. I'll call him. He'll come out here and take a look at the roof and the fences and the farmhouse. He'll give you a fair price. How much? I asked. I don't have much left. I spent everything on the down payment, and the feed and the equipment. You don't need to worry about the money, she said. I'll cover it. No, I said firmly. I'm not taking any more of your money. You've already given me more than I could ever repay. You don't have to repay me, Carol. You're not taking my money. You're accepting an investment. There's a difference. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that I didn't need her charity, that I could do this on my own. But I looked at the sagging roof and the broken fences and the leaking farmhouse, and I knew she was right. I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. I needed people who believed in me enough to lend a hand. Okay, I said. Call him. Marcus came the next week. He was a tall man with a silver beard and hands that looked like they had built half the county. He walked around the property with a clipboard and a tape measure, making notes and muttering to himself. He looked at the roof, the fences, the farmhouse. He inspected the coops I had built and the water system I had installed. When he was done, he sat down on the tailgate of his truck and looked at me with eyes that were kind but assessing. You've done a lot of work here, he said. The coops are solid. The water system is functional. But the roof is a disaster, and the farmhouse needs more work than you can do yourself. If you want this to be a real operation, you need a real structure. And you need a better heating system for the winter. I know, I said. But I don't have the money for all of that. I'm barely scraping by as it is. He nodded slowly. I can help you. I'll do the work at cost, no markup. And I'll spread out the payments so you don't have to put everything up front. But you have to promise me something. Anything. You have to take care of yourself, he said. You can't build a business if you collapse from exhaustion. You need to eat. You need to sleep. You need to let people help you. Can you do that? I wanted to say yes, but the words stuck in my throat. Taking care of myself had never been my priority. My priority had always been everyone else. Derek. The chickens. The business. I had put myself last for so long that I didn't know how to do anything else. I'll try, I said. That good enough, he said. I'll start on the roof next week. True to his word, Marcus came back with a crew of 3 men and a truck full of lumber and shingles. They worked for 5 days straight, rebuilding the barn roof and reinforcing the walls. They fixed the fences and installed a new heating system in the coops. They even patched up the farmhouse enough to make it livable. Replacing the broken windows and fixing the leaky pipes, I watched them work. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. Real deep gratitude for the kindness of strangers. These men had no reason to help me. They didn't know me. They weren't family or friends. But they had shown up anyway, giving their time and their skills to a woman they had never met. It reminded me that the world was full of good people. People who would help you if you had the courage to ask. During that time, I started to build relationships with my neighbors. The property was surrounded by farmland, and the farmers who worked the land were curious about the old lady who had bought the abandoned dairy. They came by to introduce themselves, to offer advice, to ask questions about my chickens. Some of them were skeptical. Some of them were amused. But most of them were genuinely curious. One farmer, a man named Hank who had worked the land next to mine for 40 years, came by one afternoon with a thermos of coffee and a bag of apples from his orchard. Heard you were fixing up the place, he said, handing me an apple. Thought you might need a break. I could use one, I admitted. It's been a long few weeks. He sat down on a hay bale and watched the chickens pecking in the yard. You got a good eye for this, he said. Your coops are well built. Your hens look healthy. You know what you're doing. I had a lot of help, I said. I couldn't have done it alone. That's the secret to farming, he said. You can't do it alone. You need a community. People who'll help you when the snow comes and the power goes out, and you're staring at a herd of chickens that are about to freeze to death. Is that a metaphor? I asked, smiling. It's whatever you want it to be, he said. But the point is, you don't have to do this by yourself. You got people who want to see you succeed. Don't be too proud to let them help. I took a bite of the apple. It was sweet and crisp and cold from the tree. I'm learning that, I said. Slowly. Hank became a regular visitor. He brought me fresh vegetables from his garden and eggs from his own hens, which he insisted were not as good as mine. He taught me about soil health and crop rotation, and how to predict the weather by watching the clouds. He was a kind man, a widower who had raised 3 children on his own, and he understood the loneliness of a life built on hard work and sacrifice. He also introduced me to the local farming community. I started attending meetings at the Grange Hall, sitting in the back row and listening to the farmers discuss crop prices and government subsidies, and the challenges of a changing climate. They didn't take me seriously at first. I was the outsider, the city woman who had bought a dead farm and thought she could revive it with chickens. But I kept showing up. I kept listening. I kept asking questions. And slowly, they started to respect me. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, a farmer named Earl approached me. He was a gruff man with a weather-beaten face and a voice like gravel. He had been watching me all night, and I could tell he had something to say. "Word is you're trying to get a contract with that grocery chain," he said. "Is that true?" "Yes," I said. "I am." "How many hens you got?" "About 60 now. I'm expanding to 600 over the next few months." He let out a low whistle. 600. That's a big jump for someone who just started. "I know," I said. "But I have a plan. I have the property, the coops, the feed supply. I just need the capital to make it happen." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I used to have a contract with that chain. They're hard to deal with. They'll squeeze you dry on the price. And if you miss a single delivery, they'll drop you without a second thought." "I'm aware of the risks," I said. "But I'm willing to take them." He studied me with narrowed eyes. "You're not like the other farmers I've met," he said. "Most of them are men. And the women who do this sort of work, they usually have a husband or a son to help them. But you're out here by yourself, doing all of it on your own." Why, I thought about Derek's text. I thought about the years of being invisible, of being a burden, of being the woman who was always there but never seen. I thought about the moment I had decided to change, to fight back, to prove that I was more than the role my son had assigned me. "Because I have something to prove," I said. To myself. To the people who didn't believe in me. To everyone who thought I was weak. He nodded slowly. "I can respect that," he said. "I'll tell you what. I've got some equipment I don't use anymore. A tractor, some fencing, a few other things. It's not in great shape, but it works. If you can get it running, it's yours. No charge." I stared at him, speechless. "Why would you do that?" he shrugged. "Because I was in your shoes once. A young man with nothing but a dream and a piece of land no one else wanted. People helped me when I was starting out. I'm just paying it forward." I didn't know what to say. I had been running on pure will for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to receive kindness without expecting anything in return. It was overwhelming. It was humbling. It was exactly what I needed. "Thank you," I said. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to repay me," he said. "Just don't give up. That's all I ask." I didn't give up. I kept pushing. I kept building. I kept believing. The days blurred together into a haze of early mornings and late nights and endless to-do lists. I worked through rain and wind and the first snow of the season. I worked through the aching muscles and the sleepless nights and the gnawing fear that I was going to fail. And then one morning in January, I got the news I had been waiting for. Jade called me at 6 in the morning, her voice bright with excitement. "Carol, they approved the contract. The grocery chain wants to move forward. They want 600 eggs a week starting in March. Can you do it?" I sat down on the floor of the farmhouse, my legs too weak to hold me. "Yes," I said. "I can do it. Tell them yes." "It's going to be a lot of work," she said. "You're going to need more staff, more equipment, more everything. Are you sure you're ready for this?" I looked around the farmhouse. The walls were still bare. The floors were still dusty. The kitchen sink was still leaky. But it was mine. And it was growing. And I was going to make it work. "I've been ready my whole life," I said. "I just needed someone to give me a chance." "I'm giving you that chance," she said. "Don't make me regret it." "I won't," I said. "I promise." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence. The farmhouse was cold and empty, but I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. It was the warmth of success, of victory, of proving everyone wrong. But even as I celebrated, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. The contract was just the beginning. The real work was yet to come. And I had no idea if I was strong enough to see it through. I thought about Derek. About the text that had started all of this. About the rejection that had pushed me to the edge and forced me to leap. I thought about Robert and his letter. About the line that had carried me through every dark moment. Life is made of moments, Carol. Collect the good ones and don't let the bad ones scare you. This was a good moment. This was a moment I would collect and hold on to forever. I stood up, dusted off my jeans and walked out to the barn. The chickens were clucking softly in their coops. Beatrice was perched on the top rail, her comb flopped to one side, her eyes half closed in contentment. She looked like an old queen surveying her kingdom. "We did it, Beatrice," I said. "We really did it." She clucked back at me and I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had let out in months. But as I stood there, looking at the barn and the coops and the land that was slowly becoming mine, I felt a prickle of unease. The contract was approved. The expansion was underway. But I still had no idea how I was going to pull it off. I needed more hens, more feed, more staff, more money, and I had no idea where any of it was going to come from. I walked back to the farmhouse and sat down at the kitchen table. The phone was ringing. It was Derek. I answered it. "Mom, I have some news," he said. His voice was strange, tense. "I don't know how to tell you this." "What is it?" I asked. "It's Alicia," he said. "She found out about the contract. She's been talking to the grocery chain. She's trying to sabotage you." I felt the world tilt sideways. "What do you mean?" "She called them yesterday. She told them you were a fraud, that your eggs weren't really organic, that you were cutting corners. She's trying to get them to cancel the contract." I gripped the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. "Why would she do that?" "Because she hates me," he said. "And she hates you. She wants to hurt us both." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I could feel the anger building in my chest, hot and sharp and dangerous. But I pushed it down. I had learned that anger was a weapon that could cut both ways. If I let it control me, I would lose everything. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll handle it." "How she's going to destroy everything you've built." "Let her try," I said. "I've been underestimated my whole life. And I've always come out on top." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence. The farmhouse was cold and empty, but I felt a fire burning in my chest. Alicia had crossed the line. She had tried to take away everything I had worked for. And I was not going to let her get away with it. I picked up the phone and dialed Jade's number. "I need to talk to the grocery chain," I said. "I need to tell them the truth." "What truth?" she asked. That their competitor is a bitter woman who will say anything to destroy me," I said. "And that I have the documentation to prove it." I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if I could convince them. But I was going to try. Because I had come too far to give up now. I had built too much to let it all crumble. I was going to fight. I was going to win. And I was going to show Alicia that she had made a terrible mistake by underestimating me. I called Jade back within the hour. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I had learned long ago that you could sound calm even when your insides were screaming. And right now my insides were screaming loud enough to wake the dead. I told her everything Derek had told me. About Alicia. About the phone call she had made to the grocery chain. About her lies and her sabotage and her determination to destroy everything I had built. Jade was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I believe you. But you have to understand something. The buyer from the grocery chain, a man named Mr. Crawford, he's already heard from her. He called me this morning. He said there had been concerns raised about your operation, and he wanted to do a site visit before finalizing the contract." "A site visit," I repeated. "When? Tomorrow at noon." I told him it would be fine. I didn't know about any of this when I said that. My stomach dropped. Tomorrow at noon. I had 24 hours to prepare. 24 hours to make sure that every coop was clean, every chicken was healthy, every inch of the farm was presentable. 24 hours to convince a stranger that I was not a fraud. "Then we'd better get to work," I said. "You and me. And anyone else you can find. Carol, I have a cafe to run. I can't drop everything to scrub chicken coops." "Jade," I said, and my voice came out harder than I had intended. "This is my business. It's the only thing I have left. If I lose this contract, I lose everything. The farm, the hens, the future I've been fighting for. I'm not asking you to do my work for me. I'm asking you to help me fight. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard her exhale, long and slow. What time should I be there? 6 in the morning. Bring a change of clothes. It's going to be messy. She showed up at 5:45. I was already in the barn, shoveling old bedding out of the coops and replacing it with fresh pine shavings. The smell of chicken manure was thick in the air, but I didn't mind. It was the smell of my life now, and I was proud of it. Jade rolled up her sleeves and got to work without a word. She cleaned waterers, scrubbed feeders, and helped me carry bales of hay from the storage shed. She was a city girl, but she didn't complain. She just moved with a quiet intensity that made me grateful I had called her. By 9 o'clock, we had cleaned every coop, refilled every feeder, and checked every hen for signs of illness. I had made a list of everything Mr. Crawford might ask about. Organic certification, feed sources, egg production numbers, sanitation protocols. I had answers for everything. I had receipts, invoices, and photographs to back them up. I was readied up, but I was also terrified. What if he doesn't believe me? I asked Jade as we stood in the barn, watching the hens peck at their morning grain. What if Alicia's lies are too convincing? Then we'll show him the truth, she said. That's all we can do. Show up. Tell the truth. Let the evidence speak for itself. It's not always enough, I said. The truth. Sometimes the lies are louder. She put her hand on my shoulder. Not today. Not on my watch. Mr. Crawford arrived at noon exactly. He was a portly man in a suit that was too warm for the cold January weather, carrying a leather briefcase and a clipboard. He walked around the property with a skeptical expression, peering at the coops and the waterers and the hens. Miss Harrison, he said, I have to be honest with you. Your daughter-in-law raised some very serious concerns. She claimed that your eggs were not organic, that you were using feed that contained soy and corn byproducts, that you were overcrowding your hens. She even sent me photographs. I'm sure you can understand why I needed to see things for myself. I can understand, I said. But I want you to know that everything she told you was a lie. He raised an eyebrow. A lie? Why would she lie about something like this? Because she wants to hurt me, I said. And she wants to hurt my son. Our relationship has been difficult for a long time. She sees me as a threat, and she will do anything to destroy me. He studied me for a long moment. Then he said, Show me your feed supply. I led him to the storage shed and opened the door. Inside were 50 bags of organic grain, each one labeled with the certification number and date of purchase. I showed him the invoices, the receipts, the records of every delivery I had made. This is all organic, he said, flipping through the papers. Completely traceable. Yes, I said. I keep meticulous records. Show me the coops. I took him through the barn, pointing out the heating lamps, the ventilation system, the clean waterers, the fresh bedding. I showed him the egg collection area, where every egg was washed and graded and packed in recycled cartons. I showed him the temperature logs I kept to ensure the hens were comfortable. I showed him the veterinary records for every flock I owned. He took notes on his clipboard, asking questions that I answered without hesitation. He wanted to know about my cleaning schedule, my feed rotation, my waste disposal methods. I had answers for everything. I had planned for everything. I had left nothing to chance. After 2 hours, he closed his clipboard and looked at me with an expression that was hard to read. Ms. Harrison, I have to admit, I came here expecting to find problems. Your daughter-in-law was very convincing. But what I've seen today tells a very different story. Your operation is clean, organized, and professional. You clearly care deeply about the well-being of your animals. I do, I said. They're not just livestock to me. They're my partners. My family. He nodded slowly. I'm going to recommend that we move forward with the contract. But I'll need you to sign an affidavit stating that your eggs are organic, and that you have not misrepresented your operation in any way. I'm sure you understand the liability involved. I'll sign anything you want, I said. I have nothing to hide. He handed me the paperwork, and I signed it without reading it. I didn't need to read it. I knew what it said. It said that I was telling the truth. And I was. After Mr. Crawford left, Jade let out a long breath. That was close. It wasn't close, I said. It was a test. And I passed. Barely. Passing is passing. That's all that matters. But as I stood in the barn, watching the hens scratch and peck in their clean coops, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just relief. Not just pride. Something deeper. Something that felt like vindication that Alicia had tried to destroy me, and she had failed. She had used her lies and her manipulation and her bitterness against me, and I had come out on top. Because I had something she didn't have. I had proof. I had evidence. I had the truth. I called Derek that evening. He answered on the first ring. Mom, what happened? The contract is going through, I said. I signed the paperwork today. Mr. Crawford was here. He saw everything. He knows the truth. Oh, thank God. His voice cracked with relief. I was so worried. I didn't know what she was going to do. She tried to destroy me, I said. And she failed. Because I'm stronger than she thinks. And because I had people who believed in me. I believe in you, he said. I always have. I lost my way for a while. I know, I said. And I forgive you. But you need to do something for me. Anything. I need you to stop defending her, I said. She's your wife. She's the mother of your children. And I know you still love her. But what she did today was not the act of someone who wants to reconcile. It was the act of someone who wants to destroy. And you can't keep making excuses for her. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I know. I've been making excuses for her for years. I thought if I just tried harder, if I just gave her what she wanted, she would change. But she's not going to change. She's only going to get worse. Then you need to make a decision, I said. And you need to make it soon. For your own sake. For your kids' sake. I will, he said. I promise. I didn't push him. I knew he needed time. But I also knew that time was running out. For him. For his marriage. For the future of his family. The next day, I went to the farm early, before the sun was up. I walked through the coops and checked on the hens. I filled the feeders and the waterers. I collected the eggs and packed them in cartons. It was routine now. It was my life. And I loved it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something big. Something that would change everything. That afternoon, Marcus showed up with a new water system he had built from scratch. He had designed it to be automatic, filling the troughs at regular intervals, so I didn't have to haul buckets every day. It was a small thing, but it was a sign. A sign that people believed in me. A sign that I was not alone. This is amazing, I said, testing the system. How much do I owe you? Nothing, he said. Call it an early birthday present. My birthday isn't for 3 months. Then I'm very early, he said with a grin. Don't worry about it. You've got bigger things to worry about. He was right. I did have bigger things to worry about. The contract. The expansion. The 600 hens I still needed to buy. The farmhouse that still needed work. The endless list of tasks that never seemed to shrink. But for the first time, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt determined. I felt ready. That evening, Hank came by with a casserole and news. He sat at the farmhouse table and told me about a grant program for women in agriculture. He had heard about it from a friend, he said. It was for women like me, starting small farms with limited resources. You should apply, he said. It's a lot of paperwork, but it's worth it. The money could cover the rest of your expansion. How much does it give? Up to $50,000, he said. No interest. No repayment. It's a grant. I stared at him. $52,000. Free money. It was almost too good to be true. What's the catch? I asked. No catch. You just have to prove that you're a serious farmer. And you have to commit to using the money for the business. That's it. I spent the next week filling out the application. It was pages and pages of questions about my operation, my goals, my financial situation. I had to write a business plan, a budget, and a statement of purpose. I had to prove that I was not just playing pretend, that I was serious, that I was capable. I worked on it every night, after the chickens were fed and the coops were cleaned and the eggs were packed. I wrote and rewrote and revised. I asked Jade to read it. I asked Hank to read it. I asked Marcus to read it. They all gave me feedback. They all encouraged me. Your chances are good, Jade said. You have a strong story. You have the numbers to back it up. And you have a community that believes in you. I'm terrified, I admitted. What if they say no? Then you try again. And again. And again. That's what you do. But I didn't need to try again. A month later, I received the letter. The grant was approved. $50,000. No interest. No repayment. It was the help I needed. It was the lifeline I had been waiting for. That I cried when I read the letter. I cried for myself, for the struggle and the sacrifice and the endless nights of doubt. I cried for Robert, who would have been so proud of what I was building. I cried for Derek, who had finally started to believe in me. And then I got to work. I spent the next few weeks buying more hens, building more coops, and hiring a small crew to help me manage the farm. I was running a real operation now. A real business. I was no longer the old lady with the backyard chickens. I was the owner of Harrison's Heritage Hens, a growing enterprise with a reputation for quality and care. But the success came with a cost. The farm consumed every waking hour. I had no time for myself, no time for rest, no time for the things that used to bring me joy. I was running on fumes, driven by a determination that was starting to feel more like obsession. One night, after a particularly long day, I sat on the farmhouse porch and looked out at the stars. The sky was clear and cold, and the silence was broken only by the soft clucking of the hens in the barn. I thought about Derek. He had called me that morning, his voice bright with excitement. He had finally filed for divorce. He was moving out of the house and into a small apartment near the farm. He was going to be closer to me. He was going to be part of my life again. I thought about Alicia. She had tried to destroy me, and she had failed. She was bitter and angry and alone. She had no one to blame but herself. I thought about my mother, who had taught me to wear my dignity like a crown. She had been dead for 12 years, but I could still hear her voice. Your dignity is your crown, Carol. Never let anyone take it from you. I hadn't let anyone take it from me. Not Derek. Not Alicia. Not the endless obstacles that had tried to break me. I was still standing. I was still fighting. I was still rising. But I couldn't help wondering what came next. What did you do when you had everything you had ever wanted? What did you do when you had won? Was this the ending? Or was it just another beginning? I didn't know the answer. But I knew one thing for sure. I was going to keep going. I was going to keep building. I was going to keep proving that I was not a burden, but a gift. I looked up at the stars and made a wish. Not for myself. For everyone who had helped me get here. For Linda, who had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. For Marcus, who had fixed my roof and my heart. For Hank, who had taught me that community was the secret to survival. And for Derek, who was finally learning to see me for who I really was. I closed my eyes and let the silence wash over me. It was the kind of silence that promised peace. It was the kind of silence that was filled with hope. But I knew that peace was fragile. And hope was a fragile thing too. I had learned that the hard way. I had learned that the people you trusted could hurt you. I had learned that the things you built could be taken away in a single moment. That I didn't know what was coming next. But I knew I was ready for it. I had to be. Because this was not the end. It was just the beginning of the next chapter. I stood up, dusted off my jeans and walked back into the farmhouse. The kitchen table was covered in paperwork. The laptop was still open to the spreadsheet I had been updating. The phone was blinking with missed calls and messages. I didn't answer any of them. I just sat down at the table and started working. Because that was what I did. That was who I was. A survivor. A fighter. A woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. And as I worked, I felt a smile spread across my face. Not a happy smile. A quiet one. The same smile I had worn when I read Derek's text and decided to fight back. The same smile my mother had called her just wait smile. I was still waiting. But I was also winning. The grant money arrived on a Tuesday. I watched the deposit hit my account on my phone, the numbers blinking into existence like a small miracle. And I sat down on the floor of the farmhouse because my legs had decided they no longer wanted to hold me up.
$52,000.
It was more money than I had seen in one place since Robert's life insurance check. And that had been 32 years ago, a lifetime ago, a different woman ago. That money had gone to Derek. Every cent of it had been poured into his future, his education, his security. This money was different. This money was mine. I spent the first week just buying things. Things I had been dreaming about for months but couldn't afford. A real commercial-grade incubator. A temperature-controlled storage unit for the feed. A delivery van that didn't rattle and wheeze and threaten to die on the highway. I bought new coops, better waterers, higher quality feed. I bought a computer so I could keep proper records. I bought a phone with a data plan so I could check my emails without driving to the library. I bought things that made the farm feel less like a desperate gamble and more like a real business. The second week, I started hiring. I put an ad on a local job board, looking for part-time help. I didn't expect much. Maybe a teenager who wanted pocket money. Maybe a retiree looking to stay busy. What I got was a flood of applications. People in the community had heard about my story. They had seen the article in the local paper. They wanted to be part of what I was building. I hired 3 people. A young woman named Sarah who had just graduated from college and couldn't find work in her field. A middle-aged man named Tom who had lost his job at the factory and was desperate for anything. An older woman named Patricia who had been a nurse for 40 years and wanted something quieter, something slower. They were all different, but they were all the same. They were looking for a second chance. And I was the one giving it to them. The third week I got a call from Jade. She was frantic, her voice high and tight. "Carol, you need to come to the cafe. Right now." "What's wrong?" "Just come. Please." I drove into town with my heart pounding. I had no idea what I was going to find. A fire. A robbery. A health inspection that had gone wrong. I had been through so much already that my mind automatically went to the worst possible scenario. When I walked into the Morning Bird, Jade was standing behind the counter with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair and a face that looked like it had spent a lot of time in the sun. He was wearing a suit that was too expensive for a small-town cafe. He looked like a lawyer. He looked like trouble. "Carol, this is Mr. Harrison," Jade said. "He's a representative from the grocery chain." "Mr. Crawford's boss," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances." "Under what circumstances?" I asked. "Is something wrong with the contract?" "Not with the contract," he said. "With your ex-daughter-in-law." I felt my stomach drop. "What about her?" "Mr. Crawford told me about her allegations," he said. "And I have to be honest, they concern me. Enough that I decided to do a little digging on my own. What I found was troubling." "Troubling how?" "Your ex-daughter-in-law has been contacting other suppliers," he said. "She's been telling them that your operation is a front for something else. That you're not a real farmer. That you're just a fraud who's going to disappear with the advance payment." I felt the world tilt. "That's insane. None of that is true." "I know," he said. "I investigated. I called your references. I spoke to your neighbors and your employees. I even visited your farm twice without you knowing. Once at night. Once early in the morning." I stared at him. "You spied on me." "I did my due diligence," he said. "And what I found was an operation that is exactly what you say it is. Clean. Professional. Dedicated. You are exactly the kind of supplier we want to work with." I exhaled. "Then why are you here? Why all the drama?" "Because your ex-daughter-in-law is not just spreading rumors," he said. "She is actively trying to undermine your business. She contacted our marketing department and tried to get them to cancel your contract. She contacted the local health department and filed a complaint. She even sent a letter to our board of directors, claiming that you were using child labor on your farm." I felt the anger boiling up inside me. Not the cold, controlled anger I usually felt. This was hot. This was savage. This was the kind of anger that made me want to drive to her house and scream in her face until she understood what she had done. "She's lying," I said. "Every single word. I don't even hire children." "I know," he said. "I investigated all of it. But here's the thing. She's not going to stop. She's going to keep trying to destroy you. And eventually she might succeed. Not because she's right. Because she's persistent. And persistence is its own kind of power." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "What can I do?" He looked at me with a strange expression. Something between sympathy and admiration. I want you to talk to her. Not as a fight. As a negotiation. Find out what she wants. See if you can reach some kind of understanding. Because if she keeps going, she's going to cause you a lot of problems. Legal problems. Financial problems. Reputational problems. Problems that even the best egg farmer can't solve. I didn't want to talk to her. I wanted to pretend she didn't exist. I wanted to focus on my farm, my chickens, my future. But I knew he was right. I couldn't ignore her. I couldn't pretend she didn't exist. I had to face her. I had to try to end this. I called Derek that night. I need to talk to your ex-wife, I said. She's not my ex-wife yet. The divorce hasn't been finalized. She is in every way that matters. I need to talk to her. Can you arrange it? He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I can try. But she won't want to see you. She doesn't have a choice, I said. This has to end. For everyone. He called me back the next day. She'll meet you at the park near her house. Tomorrow at noon. I don't know what's going to happen, Mom. Be careful. The park was small and quiet, the kind of place mothers took their toddlers to play on the swings. I arrived early, sat on a bench and waited. Alicia showed up 10 minutes late, pushing a stroller with Lily inside. The little girl looked up at me with confusion in her eyes, and I felt a pang of sadness. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't understand why her grandmother had been gone for so long. Alicia sat down on the bench across from me. She didn't smile. She didn't apologize. She just stared at me with a cold, hard expression. What do you want? She asked. I want this to stop, I said. I want you to stop trying to destroy my business. I want you to stop spreading lies about me. I want you to let me live my life. Your life, she laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your life is the reason my marriage is over. Your life is the reason Derek left me. Your life is the reason my kids don't have a stable family. Everything you've done, every single thing, has been about making yourself the center of attention. And I'm done with it. Your marriage was over long before I came into the picture, I said. You made sure of that. You pushed Derek away. You made him feel small. You cheated on him. You lied to him. And then when he finally had enough, you blamed me. She flinched. I didn't cheat on him. I know about the trainer, I said. I know about the gym. I know about the late nights. You were done with Derek long before he sent that text to me. You just didn't have the courage to say it. Her face went pale. How do you know about that? Derek told me, I said. He told me everything. The fights. The lies. The secrets. He told me about the debt you're hiding. The credit cards you maxed out. The money you've been sending to your parents without telling him. Her hands were shaking. That's not true. It's all true. And you know it. That's why you're so angry. Because you know that you're the one who broke your family. Not me. You. She stared at me, her eyes wet with tears. For a moment, I felt sorry for her. She was a woman who had made terrible choices, and now she was paying the price. But I couldn't let my pity stop me. I had to see this through. I'm not asking you to like me, I said. I'm not asking you to be my friend. I'm asking you to leave me alone. If you stop trying to destroy me, I'll stop telling people about the money, about the cheating, about everything. She hesitated. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a choice, I said. You can keep fighting and we can both lose. Or you can walk away, and we can both move on with our lives. She sat in silence for a long moment. Then she nodded. Fine. I'll leave you alone. But I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for Lily and Leo. They don't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. They don't, I said. They deserve a grandmother who loves them. And I do. I love them more than you'll ever know. She didn't respond. She just got up, pushed the stroller away, and walked out of the park without looking back. I sat on the bench for a long time after she left. The sun was warm on my face, and the sound of children playing filled the air. I thought about what had just happened. About the lies and the accusations and the pain. It had been ugly. It had been messy. But it had been necessary. Because now, finally, maybe we could all move on. I drove back to the farm and walked through the coops. The hens were clucking softly, scratching at the dirt, living their simple lives. I stopped at Beatrice's coop and knelt down to pet her. You know, Beatrice, I said. I think I just won the war. Not the battle. The war. She clucked back at me and I smiled. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. Deeply bone-tired that I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table. The phone was ringing. It was Derek. How did it go? He asked. It went, I said. I don't know if it's over. But I think it's over. Thank you, he said. Thank you for doing that. I didn't do it for you, I said. I did it for myself. For the farm. For the future I'm building. I know, he said. And I'm proud of you. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I had been waiting my whole life to hear him say that. And now that he had, I didn't know what to do with it. I need to go, I said. I have work to do. Okay, Mom. I love you. I love you too. I said that I hung up the phone and sat in the silence. The farmhouse was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. Full of hope. Full of the future I had built with my own 2 hands. I stood up and walked back to the barn. The hens were waiting for me. And I was ready to keep going. The weeks after the park meeting were quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural. No threatening phone calls. No anonymous complaints to the health department. No sudden visits from investigators. Alicia had kept her word. She had retreated into her own life, and I had retreated into mine. The war was over. The peace was uneasy, but it was peace. I threw myself into the farm with a ferocity that surprised even me. The grant money had given me resources I had never dreamed of, and I was determined to use every single penny wisely. I built new coops. I installed a state-of-the-art ventilation system. I bought a truck that could handle the rough roads and the heavy loads. I hired more staff. I expanded my flock to 600 hens, just as the contract required, and I watched them grow from tiny chicks into healthy, productive layers. The eggs started rolling in. Hundreds of them every day. I packed them in cartons with my logo, a simple design of a hen silhouette, and the words, Harrison's Heritage Hens in elegant script. I loaded them into the new truck and drove them to the distribution center myself, because I wanted to see the process with my own eyes. I wanted to know that my eggs were being handled with care, that they were reaching the grocery stores in perfect condition. I wanted to be sure that nothing was going wrong. The grocery chain was impressed. They sent me a letter of commendation, praising the quality of my product and the professionalism of my operation. I framed it and hung it in the farmhouse kitchen. It was a small thing, but it meant more than any award I could have received. It meant that I had been seen. I had been recognized. I had been validated. I started to expand beyond the grocery chain. I reached out to local restaurants, hotels, and bed and breakfasts. I attended farmers markets and community events. I gave interviews to local newspapers and radio stations. I became something of a local celebrity, the grandmother who had turned a backyard hobby into a thriving business. People stopped me in the grocery store to ask about my chickens. They sent me letters and emails, sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph. I replied to every single one because I knew what it felt like to be invisible, and I never wanted anyone to feel that way again. But the success came with a cost. I was working harder than ever, juggling the demands of the farm with the demands of my growing reputation. I was tired all the time. I was stressed all the time. I was starting to forget what it felt like to relax, to take a day off, to just sit and do nothing. I had become a machine, driven by a relentless need to prove myself. That one evening, Hank came by with a bottle of wine and a worried expression. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," he said, setting the bottle on the table. "When was the last time you took a break?" "I don't have time to take a break," I said. "There's too much to do." "There will always be too much to do," he said. "That's the nature of farming. But if you don't take care of yourself, you're going to burn out. And then who's going to run the farm?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't have a plan for that." "Then make one," he said. "Start thinking about the future. About the legacy you want to leave. Because you've built something amazing, Carol. And it would be a shame to see it fall apart because you worked yourself to death." I knew he was right. But I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know how to slow down. I had been running for so long that stopping felt like giving up. The next morning, I got a call from Marcus. He sounded different. Tired. "Carol, I need to talk to you." Can you come over? What's wrong? I'll explain when you get here. I drove to his house, a small cabin on the edge of town, and found him sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking. I'm sick, he said. Cancer. They caught it late. I don't have much time left. I felt the air leave my lungs. Marcus, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? There is actually, he said. That's why I called you. I have a son. He's been estranged for years. We had a falling out over something stupid, and I've been too proud to reach out. But I'm dying and I want to see him again. I need to see him. And I don't know how to fix things. Tell me about him, I said. His eyes filled with tears. His name is David. He's a lawyer in the city. We haven't spoken in 15 years. I said some things I shouldn't have said. I was angry and I was stubborn and I thought I had time to make it right. But I don't have time anymore. I took his hand. I'll help you reach out, I said. I'll do whatever it takes to bring him back. You don't have to do that, he said. You have your own life, your own problems. Marcus, you rebuilt my farm, I said. You gave me a roof when I had nothing. The least I can do is help you find your son. He nodded, and the tears started to flow. We sat on the porch for hours, talking about his life and his regrets and his hopes for reconciliation. He showed me pictures of David, a handsome young man with his father's eyes and his mother's smile. He told me about the fights, the silences, the years of lost time. He told me that he had been waiting for the right moment to reach out, and that moment had never come. I was always waiting, he said. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for the right words. And now I've run out of time. I held his hand and made a promise. I'll find him, Marcus. I'll bring him to you. The search for David was not easy. He had moved several times, changed jobs, and cut off contact with everyone from his old life. I called every lawyer in the city. I searched social media and public records. I hired a private investigator with money from the grant, because I didn't care what it cost. Marcus had given me so much. I was not going to let him die without seeing his son. Weeks passed. Marcus grew weaker. He stopped coming to the farm, stopped working on the projects he had started. I visited him every day, bringing him homemade soup and fresh eggs, and the kind of comfort that only a friend can provide. He was in pain, but he never complained. He just talked about David, about the memories they had made and the hope that they might make more. And then, finally, I found him. David was a partner at a law firm downtown. A successful man with a wife and 2 children. He had built a life for himself, but he had never forgotten his father. When I called him, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Is he dying?" "Yes," I said. "He doesn't have much time. He wants to see you. He wants to make things right." "I don't know if I can do it," he said. "I've been angry for so long. I've built my whole life around that anger. I don't know who I am without it." "I understand," I said. "But you have to do this. Not for him. For yourself. Because if you don't, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." He came the next weekend. I watched him walk up the path to his father's cabin. His shoulders squared and his expression guarded. He was a stranger, but he was also a son, and that was enough. Marcus was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, his face pale and thin. When he saw David, his eyes lit up with a joy I had never seen before. "David," he said, his voice breaking. "You came." "Dad," David said, and the word was heavy with years of silence. "I'm here." They talked for hours. I stayed on the porch, listening to the murmur of their voices, the laughter and the tears and the forgiveness. It was not an easy conversation. There were arguments and accusations and painful memories. But there was also love. And that was what mattered. When David left, he hugged his father for a long time. "I'll come back next weekend," he said. "I promise." "Please do," Marcus said. "I've missed you." I walked David to his car. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for finding me." "Your father is a good man," I said. "He helped me when I had nothing. I'm just paying it forward." "I know," he said. "He told me everything. About the farm. About the chickens. About you. He said you were the strongest woman he had ever met." I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded and watched him drive away. Marcus died 6 weeks later. He went peacefully in his sleep with David at his bedside. I was there too, holding his hand, whispering words of comfort that I hoped he could hear. He had been a good friend, a true friend, and I would miss him every day for the rest of my life. David inherited the cabin and a small fortune that Marcus had saved. He used the money to start a scholarship for aspiring farmers, in his father's name. He called me to tell me about it, and I cried with joy. Dad would have wanted this, he said. He would have wanted to help other people the way he helped you. Thank you, I said. Thank you for honoring his memory. He honored himself, David said. I was just lucky enough to know him. Life went on. The farm continued to grow. My reputation continued to spread. I was invited to speak at conferences and events, sharing my story with other women who were struggling to make their dreams come true. I was a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of resilience and determination, but I never forgot the people who had helped me along the way. Linda, who had given me the first loan. Marcus, who had fixed my roof and my heart. Hank, who had taught me the value of community. Beatrice, the old hen who had been my first companion. They were part of my story. They were part of me. One night, I sat on the porch of the farmhouse and looked out at the stars. The farm was quiet, the hens settled in their coops, the world at peace. I thought about everything I had been through, the text that had shattered my life, the struggle to rebuild, the victories and the defeats, the friends I had made and the losses I had endured. That I had come so far. I had built so much, and I was proud of what I had done. But I also knew that the journey was not over. There would always be new challenges, new obstacles, new opportunities to grow and learn. I was no longer the woman who had read Derek's text and felt her world crumble. I was someone else. Someone stronger. Someone who had faced the worst and come out the other side. I stood up and walked into the farmhouse. The kitchen was clean, the paperwork organized, the phone silent. It was the first time in months that I had felt truly at peace. That I thought about Marcus, about the friendship we had shared and the lesson he had taught me. That love was not something you kept. Love was something you passed on. Something you shared. Something you used to make the world a little bit better. I smiled, and I felt the tears start to fall. Not tears of sadness. Tears of gratitude. And then the phone rang and I answered it. Carol, it was Jade. I have something to tell you. Something you're not going to believe. What is it? I asked, bracing myself for bad news. I just got a call, she said. The grocery chain wants to expand their contract. They want to buy eggs from you exclusively. They're offering twice what they're paying now.
Plus à signing bonus.
A huge one. I sat down, the phone pressed to my ear. Are you serious? I'm completely serious. You've done it, Carol. You've done it. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. Joy. Relief. Exhaustion. Gratitude. It was all there, swirling together in a flood that was almost too much to contain. I don't know what to say. I said. Say yes, Jade said. Say yes and celebrate. You've earned it. I said yes. I said yes, and I hung up the phone and I sat on the floor of the farmhouse kitchen. And I laughed until I cried. It had been such a long road. So many obstacles, so many setbacks, so many nights when I thought I would never make it. But I had made it. I had won. I got up and walked out to the coops. The hens were silent, sleeping in their nests. I knelt down and whispered to them, we did it. We finally did it. And in that moment, I understood something important. The journey had never really been about the eggs. It had never really been about the farm. It had been about proving to myself that I was more than what others had said I was. It had been about finding my own strength, my own voice, my own way of being in the world. It had been about rising from the ashes of my son's rejection and becoming the woman I was always meant to be. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I knew that I was ready for it, because I had faced the worst and survived. And if I could survive that, I could survive anything. The contract signing took place on a Thursday. I wore my best dress, the one I had saved for Robert's memorial service and hadn't touched since. It was navy blue with small white flowers, a little outdated, a little faded, but it made me feel like myself, like the woman I had been before the grief and the struggle and the long, lonely years of being invisible. I drove to the city in my new truck, the one that didn't rattle or wheeze, and I parked in a garage that cost more per hour than I had spent on groceries in a month. The corporate office was gleaming glass and polished steel, a world away from the dirt and feathers of my farm. I felt out of place. I felt like an imposter. But I walked in with my head high and my shoulders straight, because I had earned the right to be there. Mr. Crawford was waiting for me in the lobby. He shook my hand with a warmth that surprised me, then led me up to a conference room where a team of executives sat around a long table. They were all in expensive suits, their faces carefully neutral. They looked like the kind of people who had never shoveled chicken manure in their lives, but I didn't let that intimidate me. I had come too far to be intimidated by a room full of suits. Ms. Harrison, the CEO said, rising to greet me. We've been following your story with great interest. What you've accomplished in such a short time is truly remarkable. Thank you, I said. I've had a lot of help. Modest too, he said with a smile. That's a rare quality in business. We sat down and went over the contract. The numbers were staggering. Twice what I was currently making. A signing bonus that would cover my operating costs for the next 2 years. An exclusivity agreement that would make me the sole supplier of eggs for their entire regional chain. It was everything I had dreamed of and more. I read every page carefully, asked every question that came to mind, and signed my name at the bottom with a steady hand. Congratulations, the CEO said, shaking my hand again. You've built something extraordinary. We're proud to be your partners. I walked out of that building feeling like I was floating. The city was loud and chaotic, but I didn't mind. I was part of it now. I belonged to something bigger than myself. And that felt like a victory in itself. I called Derek as soon as I got back to the truck. Mom, his voice was anxious. How did it go? It went perfectly, I said. The contract is signed. I'm officially the biggest egg supplier in the region. I heard him exhale, long and slow. I'm so proud of you, Mom. You did it. You really did it. Did you ever doubt I would? Honestly, he paused. At first, yeah. I didn't understand what you were trying to do. I thought you were just, I don't know, having a breakdown or something. A breakdown, I repeated, and I couldn't help but laugh. That's what you thought. I didn't know any better. I was so wrapped up in my own problems that I couldn't see what you were building. But I see it now. And I'm sorry it took me so long. Apology accepted, I said. But you need to understand something, Derek. I didn't do this for you. I didn't do it to prove you wrong. I did it for myself. Because I needed to know that I was more than what you thought I was. I know, he said. I know that now. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel like a burden again. I promise. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. And for the first time, I did that. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The farm was busier than ever, the orders piling up, the staff working around the clock. I hired more people. I built more coops. I expanded my flock to 1,000 hens, then 1,500. I became a fixture in the community, known not just for my eggs but for my generosity. I donated eggs to food banks and homeless shelters. I gave free tours to school groups and community organizations. I opened my farm to anyone who wanted to learn about sustainable agriculture, because I believed in sharing what I had been given. But I never forgot the moment that had started it all. The moment I had read Derek's text and felt my world shatter. I kept that text saved on my phone, not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder of what I had overcome. It was proof that I could survive anything. One evening, I sat on the farmhouse porch with Derek. He was drinking coffee, and I was holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. The sun was setting over the pastures, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The hens were clucking softly in the distance, settling in for the night. Mom, Derek said, breaking the silence. I need to tell you something. I looked at him, his face half lit by the dying sun. What is it? Alicia called me yesterday. She wants to reconcile. She says she's changed. She says she's been going to therapy, working on herself. She wants to be a family again. I felt my heart clench. What did you tell her? I told her I needed time to think, he said. I don't know what to do, Mom. Part of me still loves her. Part of me wants to believe that people can change. But another part of me is terrified that she's going to hurt me again. Hurt the kids again. I set down my cup and took his hand. Derek, I can't tell you what to do. Only you can make that decision. But I can tell you this. People can change. I've seen it happen. I've done it myself. But change takes time. It takes work. It takes a willingness to face the worst parts of yourself and choose to be better. If Alicia is truly ready to do that, then maybe you owe it to yourself and the kids to give her a chance. But what if she's not ready, he asked. What if she's just saying what she thinks I want to hear? Then you'll know, I said. Because her actions will show you. Not her words. Her actions. Watch what she does, not what she says. And if she starts to pull the same old tricks, you'll see it. And you can walk away, knowing you gave it your best shot. He nodded slowly. You always know what to say, don't you? No, I said with a smile. I just know what I wish someone had told me when I was your age. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that crinkled his eyes and made him look like the little boy I used to know. I love you, Mom. I hope you know that. I know, I said. And I love you too. No matter what happens, I'll always love you. He hugged me then, tight and long. And I felt the years of hurt and distance start to fade. We weren't perfect. We were still working on it. But we were trying. And that was what mattered, that the night was quiet and still. The stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. I sat alone on the porch after Derek had gone home. And I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. The pain. The struggle. The victory. I had come so far from the woman who had received that cruel text. The woman who had felt like a burden and nothing more. I had built something from nothing. I had risen from the ashes of my son's rejection. And become something extraordinary. I thought about Robert. And I felt his presence in the cool night air. He was proud of me. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. He had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. And now I was carrying on his legacy, building a life that honored his memory and his sacrifice. That I thought about Marcus, and I felt a pang of loss. He had been a true friend, a guiding light in my darkest moments. He had taught me that love was not something you kept, but something you passed on. And I was determined to pass it on. To everyone I met, in everything I did. I thought about my mother, and I heard her voice in my mind. Your dignity is your crown, Carol. Wear it. I had worn it through the worst of times, and I was wearing it now. It was battered and scuffed, but it was still mine. It was still the thing that made me who I was. I stood up and walked out to the barn. Beatrice was perched on her favorite rail. Her comb flopped to one side. Her eyes half closed in contentment. She was old now, past her prime, but she was still here. Still clucking. Still scratching. Still living her simple, beautiful life. You know, Beatrice, I said, reaching out to stroke her feathers, I don't think I ever thanked you properly. You were my first hen, my first hope, my first step towards something better. You taught me that it's never too late to start again. That even old birds can find new purpose. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for every single moment. She clucked softly, as if she understood that I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table. The paperwork was done. The orders were filled. The future was bright. I could finally rest. I could finally breathe. But I knew that the story wasn't over. There would always be new challenges, new obstacles, new opportunities to grow. I was no longer the woman who had read that text and felt her world crumble. I was someone else. Someone who had faced the worst and come out the other side. That I was a survivor. I was a fighter. I was a woman who had built an empire from a single chicken and a broken heart. And I was going to keep building, keep growing, keep proving that I was more than what others thought I was. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I realized that the greatest victory wasn't the contract or the money or the recognition. It was the person I had become. The strong, resilient, unshakable woman who had refused to give up, no matter how hard things got. That was my real legacy. Not the eggs. Not the farm. The woman I had chosen to be. In the morning, I woke to the sound of the hens. It was the best alarm clock I had ever known. I got up, made my coffee, and walked out to greet the day. The sun was rising over the pastures, golden and warm. It was going to be a beautiful day. I could feel it. I looked out at the barn, at the coops, at the fields where my hens were already scratching and pecking. This was my home. This was my life. and I was grateful for every single moment of it. I thought about the journey, the long and winding road that had brought me here. I thought about the people who had helped me along the way. Linda, with her unwavering faith. Marcus, with his generous heart. Hank, with his gentle wisdom. Jade, with her fierce loyalty. And Derek, my son, who had finally learned to see me for who I really was. I thought about the text that had started it all. The words that had broken me and rebuilt me. Mom, do not visit our home this weekend. We have decided that we will not support any burdens. You need to figure out your own life. Please respect our decision. I had figured out my own life. I had figured it out in ways I never could have imagined. And I had done it without anyone's permission or approval. I smiled, and I whispered to the morning air. Thank you, Derek. Thank you for giving me the push I needed to become who I was always meant to be. The hens clucked in response, and I laughed. It was the sound of joy. It was the sound of freedom. It was the sound of a woman who had finally found her place in the world. That I walked into the farmhouse and picked up my phone. It was time to share my story. Not for recognition. Not for validation. Because someone out there needed to hear it. Someone out there was going through the same pain I had felt, the same rejection, the same struggle to find their place in the world. And if my story could help them, even a little, then it was worth telling. I started typing, the words flowing out of me like water. It was the story of a woman who had been told she was a burden, and had chosen to become a force. A woman who had been broken, and had built herself back up. A woman who had been invisible, and had made herself seen. And as I typed, I realized that I was writing the story of all women. The ones who had been dismissed and discarded. The ones who had been told they weren't enough. The ones who had been expected to fade away, and had chosen to rise instead. This was for them. This was for all of us. I finished the post, read it over, and pressed publish. Then I sat back and waited. The likes and comments started flooding in almost immediately. People were sharing my story, cheering me on, telling me how much it meant to them. I read every single comment, tears streaming down my face. This was what I had been fighting for. Not just my own success, but the chance to inspire others. To show them that they could overcome anything. That they were not burdens. They were gifts. They were miracles. They were everything. I closed my laptop and walked back out to the barn. Beatrice was waiting for me, her head tilted, her eyes bright. She clucked at me and I clucked back. We did it, I said. We really did it. She clucked again and I laughed. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. The sun was climbing higher. The morning warming into something golden and full of promise. There was work to do, orders to fill, a farm to run. But for just a moment, I stood still and let myself feel the weight of everything I had accomplished. It was overwhelming. It was glorious. It was mine. I had built something from nothing. I had turned pain into purpose. I had become a woman I could be proud of. And no one, not my son, not my ex-daughter-in-law, not the entire world, could take that away from me. I looked up at the sky and whispered a prayer of thanks. To Robert. To my mother. To everyone who had believed in me and everyone who hadn't. They had all played a part in shaping the woman I had become. And I was grateful for every single one of them. If this story touched your heart, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment, and tell me about a moment when you refused to let someone else define your worth. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories of resilience, hope, and triumph. Because your story matters too. And I can't wait to hear it.